Da 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 da. Hey folks, it's our emergency podcast for Hotel Pacifico. That's the new emergency music that we've just dialed up for today. The big news that BC United and BC Conservatives have decided to work together and avoid a vote split for the coming election. I'll be joined here in the special emergency segment with my good friend, Kim Haakstad. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Mike.
Kim and I were co-pilots of the Premier's office way back in the good old days, 2011, 2012. And I can't think of anyone I'd rather share this auspicious historical day than Kim. But first, a few Hotel Pacifico housekeeping matters. This special segment is being placed on top of our regularly scheduled programming that was about to drop today before we heard about the news conference. And that is a one-to-one interview with Sonia Furstenau, with myself and Sonia Furstenau. I hope you'll stay around for that. Sonia had a lot of interesting things to say. And then following the Furstenau interview was our strategy suite panel with BC tax fighter Jordan Bateman and former Vancouver City Councillor Andrea Reimer, who were breaking down the Furstenau interview and other BC issues before we saw this coming. So let me get to the main event here that's just happened. We've just literally watched the news conference of John Rustad and Kevin Falcon and digesting it in real time. And I'm going to start this off with a eulogy for the BC Liberal Party. And, you know, we've talked a bit on the podcast about the big bang of BC politics. And I wrote about it last April, that there are moments in BC politics where everything changes in terms of fundamental realignments of who the voters end up choosing to be their free enterprise coalition. That happened in 1952 with the Socreds. It happened in 1975 when the Socreds re-energized themselves and brought Liberals and Conservatives back behind them. It happened in 1991 with the BC Liberals when they emerged to replace the Socreds as the leaders of the free enterprise parties. And while this has been happening in slow motion for the last year and a half, it's kind of official today that the BC Conservatives are now that vehicle. And we don't have to wait until October 19th to find out. It's basically by BC United laying down its arms. We are now entering a new era of BC politics insofar as the non-NDP, Just Ketchum's non-NDP party, he calls it, is concerned. And so in digesting that, we have to look, I have to reflect back on, you know, where we've come from and the era that is ending officially here today or shortly when all this gets executed. For me, it started on Halloween Day, 1987, when a man named Gordon Wilson was acclaimed as leader of the BC Liberal Party at the then called Delta River Inn in Richmond, BC, with a fairly low energy, not well attended convention, choosing a pig farmer and college instructor from Seychelles to lead a party that no one had any hopes for other than the people in that room. 4 years later, Gordon Wilson had led the BC Liberals to remarkable comeback and official opposition. He gave way 2 years later to Gordon Campbell, who built the modern day BC Liberal Party and led it for 18 years and ultimately led it to election in 2001. It led to Christy Clark breathing new life into the BC Liberal Party and extending its life in government for 6 years. But towards the end of its time in government, those inexorable forces of change started to seep in. The creeping disease of governmentitis, the increasing hunger of the opposition to do whatever it takes to win, all those things conspired to lead to, by the narrowest of margins, a change in government in 2017. It couldn't have been any closer, but yet it happened. And two successive leaders now failed in their quest to revive the BC Liberals and bring it back to power. And today, it's led us to today where basically the party will no longer field candidates, at least for this election. There's a book by Barbara Tuchman, noted historian, called The March of Folly, which is about the pursuit of policies that are contrary to that organization's or government's own interests. And it's always struck me that in a way, the BC Liberal Party resembled that in its later years. Failure to stay apace of growing populations, failure to recognize the changing circumstances of British Columbia, failure to renew, failure to bring in new blood, replenish itself in a way that the Alberta Conservatives were able to do for many years, to continually reinvent themselves and provide a different look. And the BC Liberals were a little too complacent, a little too resistant to change, a little too comfortable. And eventually it led to a vacuum, and a scrappier, hungrier group of the Conservatives came up and challenged them. And through circumstances, much at the hand of the BC Liberals themselves by changing the name of the party, has led to this moment today. Now, I'd like to say a personal message to the young people and the grassroots supporters of BC United, who were asked to follow the decisions of leadership over the years and loyally did so even when those decisions didn't turn out to be the right ones. This isn't on you. You've worked hard. You're the lifeblood of the party. For many of you young people, especially who worked in staff positions or work in staff positions today, wondering about your future, this is just one step in the political cycle. There will be electoral wins ahead of you. There will be electoral success ahead of you if that's what you want to do. My first campaign was 1984 for the Liberal Party of Canada. It was a bloodbath. We're covered in our own blood. Yet, years later, Liberals were in power provincially, Liberals were in power federally, and we all get our shot sooner or later. So chin up, and you may find your place in this new coalition. You may not want to, but you have talents and you will take them elsewhere, and you'll do just fine. I think of people like my good friend Lindsay Cote, who's the executive director of BC United, and it's a very tough day for her. And she is exceptional, and I know that she'll have many options wherever she decides to do. But I think of people like Lindsay, who was an integral part of the BC Liberal successes in the past, but has loyally remained on the job through thick and thin, and that's politics. You know, we've all been there. Those of us have been around a long time, anyways. So what now? We may now be approaching clarity. We may now be reaching that moment where it's a binary fight, other than the Greens, between the NDP and the Conservatives. And did we think we were going to get there? I kind of thought we weren't, actually. I thought there was a lot of discussions in the spring. I'm surprised today that this actually got pulled off, but yet it did. And it's recognizing reality, I think, on the BC United side of things. But it's not going to come without some collateral damage. There's going to be a lot of people who are hurt and who will not want to follow this direction. And you may hear in the days ahead, BC United people wanting to fight on, or BC United people going to the NDP, or BC United people even going to the Greens. It's a shakeup. A lot of unpredictable things are going to happen. But the fundamental reality of BC United pulling back has to be good news for the Conservatives and troubling news for the NDP, at least today. We'll see what the days ahead look like. Lots of questions we'll talk about with Kim here in a moment. Who's coming, who's going? They didn't say anything today about who those candidates are going to be. In fact, they said it might be weeks before they announce who the candidates are going to be. It's going to create a ton of uncertainty for BC United candidates if they're included on part of the team, but BC Conservative candidates looking over their shoulder. So that's a big question I have. This is really late in the process. But most importantly, what are voters going to make of this? Are they going to be happy? Are they going to be turned off by a quote unquote backroom deal. We're in uncharted territory here. And all of this in the context of, yes, a competitive election, but a leader, a premier of the province who actually people like. He has net positive numbers, better numbers than John Rustad. So there's an uphill climb, notwithstanding this vote split issue seemingly being resolved, to still overtake Mr. Eby. And we haven't even seen any negative ads yet. So quite a day. BC politics, never dull. I feel like my life is changed somewhat, even though I haven't been active for a number of years. I was that 18-year-old geek at the Halloween Leadership Convention in 1987. I was in the green room in 1991 during the leaders debate when Gordon Wilson was doing his thing to make the breakthrough. I had heartbreak in 96. I felt the relief, not the joy, the relief of winning in 2001. And I had with Kim here the multiple coronaries of Christy Clark's leadership campaign and government experience, and the last ditch gasp to stay in power as part of the negotiating team on the confidence vote. Just 20, 30 years of my life tied in with the BC Liberal Party. So how do I feel today? I feel, it's politics. It's the life and death. It's a life cycle, and nothing can be the same forever. There must be renewal. We try to shape that, but a new group and there is going to come forward with their own theory of life, and they're going to get their shot now. And here we go. So Kim,
thanks, Mike.
What the hell?
I don't know. I mean, I will say that I think you've been involved for more than 30 years, because it was 28 years ago this year that I moved to BC in September of 1996. And that October, I met Christy Clark. And so I've been involved now in the BC Liberals for almost 28 years. So I think it's been more than 30 for you. But, the first thing I think about today is the candidates that have put their professional and personal lives on hold. Those that are elected have a job and they'll continue working in that and through the process that elected officials have the opportunity to do. But those candidates who have put their professional and personal lives on hold, and today many of them found out this news by seeing it first on social media. And so I want to take a moment to thank all those folks for being willing to put their name forward in what is a really complex political environment, and offering themselves up because they're doing it for really good reasons. They're motivated to improve their province and their communities. So I just want to say a big thank you to them. And that while I've never put my name on the ballot, I do know that this is a really tough day.
Neither have I. We're two big chickens right here. But but yeah, some BC United candidates have just become candidates, but others have been working hard for over a year, raising money, trying to buck their teams up, to saying, look, you guys got to hang in there. And so today is definitely a splash of cold water in their faces, that's for sure. Yet some may carry on. I assume a minority of them, like a handful, or I no idea, didn't speculate on how many BC United candidates might become Conservative candidates, but I can't imagine it's going to be easy given the Conservatives are already nominated 80 plus.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, that's where there's going to be a ton of uncertainty, both for the BC United caucus members and for the BC United candidates, especially at those in ridings where maybe there's already a BC Conservative now MLA because they've left the BC United already, or because they're running against someone that has now invested their time in being a BC United candidate. And so it's probably good that John Rustad and Kevin Falcon didn't try and predict the future too much today, but there's going to be a lot of open questions over and I was shocked to hear next few weeks, because I do think they're going to need to handle this really quite quickly in the next few days, or it's going to get away from them. Candidates have to make some of their own life decisions, as do the elected caucus members from the BC.
Well, they're not going to be able to just talk about it in a vacuum. People are going to react. And, there's a number of ridings I can think of where there's a strong BC United candidate, whether it's an incumbent or not. And the Conservative, is going to be like let's take Caribou North, Corley Oaks, she's a formidable MLA, but there's a conservative running hard in that riding. Um,
Yeah.
you know, I thought maybe 4 months ago, 5 months ago, Pollyanna's thinking, but that kind of a joint runoff process or something that just let people settle it in the riding by a joint nomination meeting might be a potential way to go, but there's no time for that. It's now it's just a stroke of the pen by the leader as to who the candidate's going to be.
Yeah, you look at how fast we're seeing things move in the US for an election that's in November. This one's in October and it happened later. And so
Yeah.
it is going to be really interesting to see how folks rally and respond. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the polls, right? The BC United has been polling pretty low, pretty sad.
Yeah.
You're a pollster, you're probably watching it closer than me. Um, but what does it look like now when you take the BC United out of that calculation? And I think you suggested this in your opening editorial a bit too. How many people actually start looking at the BC NDP? Because there is kind of a gaping hole in the middle of British Columbia politics now. And I think that's something that people are going to be discussing over the next little while. And is John Rustad and the Conservatives going to continue to moderate and be that broader free enterprise coalition that the BC Liberals were under Gordon Campbell and Christy Clark? Or are the NDP going to start looking towards the center and really trying to find those people that are still voting federal liberal or more inclined to vote federal liberal, see themselves in the center, believe in climate change, are very concerned about, how our children are treated in schools, and that just may not find political alignment with some of the policies of the BC United Party. There's a hole there and an opportunity for both parties
Yeah.
if they want to fill it.
Yeah. And it's two things. It's where voters go. It's also where maybe activists go as well,
For
who
sure.
actually make more of a difference, either through their endorsements, through their hard work, through their money, all those things. And um, I wonder about the Greens. Like, I think this is probably good news for the Greens. It might give them a couple extra points in the popular vote, because we saw this in 2017. People that were just a little burnt out by BC Liberals, and 2020 just couldn't go NDP. The Greens were a little protest vote, holding pen for them. But probably in the city, especially, some kind of centrists who just can't stomach the Conservatives will just go NDP.
For sure. And I think that'll be based on local candidates and based on policies. I've been talking to lots of people today. I'm sure, like me, your phone blew up with people trying to say, well, what am I going to do? And many of those were not sure what they were going to do in the BC United, BC Conservative decision making process. But now that it's down to really the BC Conservatives, the NDP, and as you say, maybe some folks will go to the Greens. It's not an easy decision for a lot of centrist voters to know where they're going to be, and even some center right people who have really been invested in the BC Liberals haven't been sure about the BC United and are trying to figure out where they go today. So makes the election more interesting. Probably
Yeah,
not a great
it's
day for David Eby for Premier Eby, right?
yeah, it's just you never quite know how these things actually are going to turn out, right? Some things that look, I mean, look, remember when Danielle Smith crossed the floor to Jim Prentice in what was that, 2012? And it was like, oh my God, Prentice is going to win like 95% of the seats. And he ends up losing the election because the whole thing backfired on him. I'm not suggesting this isn't
Yeah.
the same thing. The point I'm making is it's just unexpected consequences sometimes. Or maybe the momentum is greater than we might suspect as well, because some British Columbians might be like, who is this Rustad guy? Is he really the guy now? Okay, let's get behind him.
Well, and I think we always find as we get closer to BC elections, and we'll find this as we get out of the summer and into the fall and into the core of the election period, people start to tune in. And many of them have probably not even thought about who the provincial candidates are. Sometimes we get that voter confusion between the federal and provincial parties. I think that's happening somewhat on the Conservative side. Rustad has benefited from some of Pierre Poilievre's popularity for sure. Will that continue as people actually start tuning into the fact that there's an BC election this fall and start thinking about who they're going to vote for in their own ridings?
I mean, let's take a second just on John Rustad.
Yeah.
And you and I both worked with him in government. He was Minister of Indigenous Relations for a good stint, maybe 4 years or so, and a private member before that. Took him a while to get his shot in cabinet. He didn't get it under Gordon Campbell, but he got it under Christy Clark eventually. And, I think no one would have had it on their bingo card that John Rustad himself would ever have leadership aspirations. He had a couple chances to run for leader after Christy Clark left the first time and then after Andrew Wilkinson left, and he chose not to and backed Ellis Ross the latter time. Yet here he is today, one of two men who are vying for premier of the province. Either him or David Eby will be premier after October 19th. What a remarkable rise for him through a whole range of things.
Yep.
Temper tantrum, through, just he'd had enough and didn't want to be constrained anymore and got kicked out of caucus. And then it's like, I'll show them. And then putting his head down and building the BC Conservative Party. And he did the work.
Well, and the putting his head down and doing the work is the part that doesn't surprise me, right? I will say one of my most memorable moments with John Rustad was when Christy and I were traveling the province during her leadership campaign, and we were stranded because our transportation had frozen up in the cold of traveling British Columbia in the north, in the north in February. And John Rustad, who was supporting another candidate, came and picked us up and drove us to his riding and introduced Christy in one of the most kindest, thoughtful introductions we heard, especially from someone who wasn't supporting her. And then, I remember when Christy called him and brought him in to meet with her and invited him to be in her cabinet. I don't know if there was a happier person in British Columbia at that time. And then John worked really hard at it. And so he worked hard to be a good cabinet minister. He worked hard to be a pragmatic part of the caucus. And he was always a very kind person to work with. Certainly there's been other experiences I think other folks have had, but it doesn't surprise me that he's put in the work at all.
Well, he's been underestimated, and which is
sure.
a great position to be in as a politician. And he's still not well known by British Columbians, although an increasing number are becoming aware of him. His leadership numbers are okay, not great, but not, he's got room to grow, let's put it that way. The main accomplishment, though, is he's gone out and he's put together this team and he's eclipsed the BC United, and they just never thought he could do it, and
I remember
never thought he could get to this point. And he seized. Look, everybody knows if he jumped into the BC, ABC party, it never would have gone anywhere. It'd been like 1% in the polls, but the thing's got the name Conservative, and he seized it, and somebody was going to, and he did, and he made more out of it than anybody has since 1928. Simon Fraser told me.
Well, there you go. Always trust Mike McDonald for your British Columbia history lesson. And now the microscope, though, is going to be on him in an even greater way, and on his candidates in an even greater way. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few weeks. I think there's been lots of questions about their candidate vetting process. There was a question today about his stance on climate change in the presser, and John Rustad avoided answering the question, which I thought was interesting.
Avoided it, yeah.
He's going to have to answer that question. He's going to have to answer it several times over between now and election day. And so, as that scrutiny increases and we get out of the summer quiet period, it's going to be interesting to see what that means for this party, and certainly for Premier Eby and the NDP as well. There's lots of questions out there about what a re-elected Eby government looks like, and John Rustad, united with the BC United Party folks, are going to continue to ask those questions now that they're going to stop fighting with each other.
So just looking over my notes of this press conference that happened in the last hour, some of the things that Falcon did say that bear repeating here. The board of directors of the party endorsed it, so he's got that in place. He briefed the caucus and candidates, and some were not happy campers, but to Kevin's credit, he was taking that on the chin himself.
Yes.
one thing I found interesting is he was in speaking through the press conference to the caucus and the party workers and so forth. He said he will have quote unquote line of sight into a range of areas on the Conservative campaign. So,
Ah,
the idea that he was relinquishing um, his seat and his leadership and going to just fade off into the background is not necessarily the case now. It's that he claims he's gonna influence it. He is going to be I don't know if partner is the right word, but a collaborator or whatever the word is. He's going to be involved and he's going to be advocating for things. And there's a tension there as to for Rustad is he has this opportunity to do a reset on a few things, saying because of the deal. And he has a chance to deal with some of the candidates on this basis as well, and kind of like wipe the slate clean in a few cases. On the other hand, he's got his own stakeholders within the Conservatives who are like, why are you giving all this power over to BC United? They're the enemy. So he's going to be walking a tightrope right
yeah, I think that's true. And it's interesting because I didn't pick up on that nuance in the press conference, so I'm glad you did. But remember, you and I have both been involved in politics for a long time. What we say at a press conference on a day like today, and what actually happens as the next few weeks unfold, and how much influence Kevin Falcon and others from the BC United that stayed till the very end uh, have is still to be seen, right? That there may be something there, and there may actually not be much. It may be a message that makes uh, you know, gives an opportunity for Kevin to say that today. But how much influence he's going to have over the BC Conservatives is hard to tell. Now, people that are close to Kevin and that worked for the BC United to until the last few weeks are now there. They're working at the staff level in several cases. And so there is going to be some crossover and ultimately some learnings that the BC Conservatives didn't have, that now they'll have some power of all the history that you outlined at the beginning of the BC United and before that the BC Liberal Party working in ridings across this province. And so it'll be interesting to see how that all unfolds, I think.
now. Yeah. Well, I thought obviously not the press conference Kevin Falcon wanted to have. I thought I was actually struck by how collegial he and John were,
Yes.
given the nasty words have been exchanged over the last year. And I gather there'd been a fairly extensive negotiating session last night, according to Kevin on the news
Yeah.
conference. And he was quite gracious in the news conference. So, and probably, you and I have both known Kevin a long time.
Yep.
I went to university with him back in the 1700s. And he, you know, we've crisscrossed in politics, obviously different leadership campaign at one point, and he was finance minister to Christy, and so a lot of water's gone under the bridge, a lot of it positive, some of it challenging sometimes, but a lot of respect for him and understanding how difficult a day like this would be for him. So I thought he handled it very graciously, and this,
Yep.
there's still a devil in the details here, but it's tough for any politician to give up their dream to be, in his case, premier of the province. And today was the end of the road for him on that. And that's a tough thing. And we can canvass obviously all the decisions that were made in the last year and a half that were definitely maybe well intentioned, but definitely were political disasters. The rebrand, obviously, but there's still a humanity there, and you know, he had a
Yeah.
contribution to make. He gave it his best shot. And at least today he was, I thought, very gracious in how he is trying to bring it to a resolution.
Well, and I think he's really sincere when he talks about his daughters. And you and I remember when he decided not to run again with Christy, and
Yeah.
that was about what he said today, that they were pregnant with their second child and awaiting that and really shifting his priorities. And I have no doubt, I haven't talked to Kevin in quite a while, but I have no doubt that he's very sincere that he got back into it because of it, because he wanted to build a better future for his children. He's clearly a person motivated by public service, and it's a big deal to step aside and decide that he himself is not running now, right? That's a big change from yesterday, that Kevin is also stepping aside in a riding that maybe he could have held. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens in Vancouver Coolchana now.
Yeah. Well, Kim, thank you for joining this emergency edition of Hotel Pacifico. Kate and Jeff have obviously, these guys have been on vacation for like 3 months, it seems, and they're missing all the fun. But I'm glad you could help me enjoy, or I don't know if enjoy, but commemorate this day, marking an end for us as, historic
Yeah,
BC Liberals, that there's a chapter has been flipped over. So,
it
but
has. Well, thank you for having me.
can't think of anyone I would rather have with me more than you, Kim. So
I
thank
know,
you.
and if only I was in town so that we could talk more over a drink this evening, but we'll do that soon. Thanks,
Yeah,
Mike.
we'll do that soon. Thanks, Kim. And for our listeners, stay with us. You're about to hear a one-on-one interview with Sonia Furstenau, and later on, even more political commentary.
You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. I'm flying solo again this week. Kate continues to recharge her batteries. I hear her batteries are at about 87% right now, and they will be fully charged by next week. I'm hoping that she's using renewable power to recharge her batteries, given our guest today later. And that Jeff Meigs, that guy has a lot of gull. That would be seagulls and other assorted gulls who are communing with him on his rain-shadowed island hidey hole. When he's back, he will regale us about the health benefits of guano. Later on in Strategy Suite, I'll be joined by 2 retired local government councillors who are definitely unretired from political commentary. Former City of Vancouver councillor Andrea Reimer cashes in on her reward points for a second stay at Hotel Pacifico, while Langley's tax-scrapping Jordan Bateman has valeted his wood-paneled suburban station wagon with the rear-facing seats to join us as well. But first, it's my honor to welcome our first leader to Hotel Pacifico, Sonia Furstenau of the BC Green Party. Of the 4 leaders contesting this upcoming election, Sonia has the longest tenure. In fact, she is the only leader to have experience leading her party in a general election campaign. She was first elected to office in 2017 from the Cowichan Valley, relieving the NDP of one of their seats, and was re-elected in 2020. Since the last election, the riding boundaries have been redrawn, with her riding of 7 years split into 2. She decided to contest her riding further afield in Beacon Hill in Victoria, and is challenging NDP Cabinet Minister Grace Lord. But who is Sonia Furstenau? Her father came to Canada from East Germany as a refugee in the 1950s. Born in Edmonton, she studied at UVic while juggling parenthood as a single mom. She became a teacher, taught in Victoria before heading over the Malahat to the Cowichan Valley, where she taught in Shawnigan Lake, and emerged as a community activist fighting a contaminated soil site. She was also elected as a director on the Cowichan Valley Regional District. Then in 2017, she defied the odds and to become, tied with Adam Olsen, the second Green MLA ever elected in BC. I hope I got all that right factually. Sonia, welcome to Hotel Pacifico.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, you got it great. If I can add one thing,
Sure.
I think there's a lot about my dad's history. My mom's side of the family, my grandmother was born on Saturna Island at the turn of the century.
Born on Saturna.
Yeah, so if anybody goes to Payne Point or Payne Road or Breezy Bay, my grandmother was born in the home that is now Breezy Bay Bed and Breakfast. And my grandfather grew up in Victoria on my mom's side, actually 2 houses from our house in Fairfield. And so they met in the 1920s at Craigdarroch Castle when it was Victoria College. Fell in love. got married, became teachers, went off to Stewart, BC, and then settled in Comox, where my mom grew up.
Wow, that's a lot of, you covered a lot of geographical basis there. And I wonder how many people have actually been born on Saturna Island over the years. Probably, it's not a long list.
No, not a lot. And she was an amazing character. I always wear her pendant. People might notice I always have this pendant on. This was hers. It was from the carver Dennis Hanous. And I love these pictures of my gran in the 40s wearing pants and carrying a glass of rye and smoking a cigarette and standing on fishing boats. And sort of with this defiant look in her face, like, I just dare you. But I also learned recently that my grandfather, Ted Richardson, he was the principal at Comox High School. And he was very good friends with Chief Mungo Martin. And one of the things that they arranged was for kids to come to Comox High School, so they didn't go into residential schools. And one of those kids was Bill Wilson, who was my Uncle Doug's best friend. Mom said
Jody Wilson Rabel's father.
Right. So I have these, there's the German background on my dad's side, and then there's this deep British Columbia background on my mom's side. And our son now is at UVic, so both of his grandfathers, both of his parents also attended UVic. Or Victoria College, as it was before it was UVic. So he's third generation UVic.
Steeped on the South Island.
Yeah.
So you were a teacher.
Yeah.
How would your students have described you as a teacher?
I just ran into one of my students from 15 years ago. I taught at Colquitt's, a grade 8 class. And she was serving coffee at a local coffee shop. And she said, "Oh, it's so nice to see you, Miss Furstenau." And I was like, "Sonia, it's just Sonia." And she said that she and a group of students from that year are still friends. And when they get together, they talk about grade 8, that was the year for them, that really they loved school that year. They learned a lot. I've maintained a lot of relationships with my students over the years and watched them grow up and become parents and move into careers. I prioritized making my classroom feel like a really safe place. And so I invested in those early weeks of the school year into the kids really getting to know me really getting to know them getting to know each other. And so we built this real community feeling in our classroom. And what I found was once that was in place, they could learn anything. And they were just so capable of learning. Another time I had a student come into my history class, my grade 12 history class, and she had a cup of tea and she said, "I feel like I'm walking into home when I walk into your class. Like it feels like home." And so I take the lessons that I learned as a teacher and I apply them to my job as a politician and a leader of a party. And I ask the question, are we succeeding at ensuring that people in this province feel safe, that they feel secure, that they feel like they can take risks, that they can take chances, they can go and study, or maybe open a business, or have a child, or consider a career change, or consider a change in their relationship. And I think what we see right now is that a lot of people don't feel that sense of security and safety. And when we have people who feel less secure, then we see less risk-taking, less, sort of leaping into new things. And we see people kind of, their worlds shrink a little bit. It's harder to think about big issues. It's harder to think about the future, or how do we build stronger communities when you feel insecure in your own life. And I think that is the task of government, is to ensure that people feel safe and secure.
Well, I do want to provide you, given that we're a month away from the election starting, some space here to maybe start off here with the elevator pitch.
Right.
You know, imagining I walk into your office and say, I'm an undecided voter. Um, what's what's the elevator pitch for this coming election for you and the Greens?
You know, it's a little different for me as the leader of the party than it is for me as the candidate in Victoria Beacon Hill. So I'm going to start as leader of the party. And the pitch that I'm making to voters is that in BC, we've had almost always this long-standing two-party system. We've had a party on the right and a party on the left, you know, and whatever name those parties exist under, that's basically the duality we've had in BC. And what we often see is the parties reacting to each other. So the more right-wing parties will cut taxes and cut services, and then the NDP will come in and spend a lot of money, but not really restore or deliver on those services. And then we swing back to the other side. And so these swings that we've had in BC have gotten us to exactly where we are today. This feeling of insecurity, this sense that government isn't delivering the basic services that it should be delivering, but it's spending a lot of money. The Greens are a balance to that seesaw of BC politics. We are long-term thinkers. We are solution-oriented. We are collaborators. We work across party lines. We work across jurisdictions. And we focus on how do we get a government to deliver what people should absolutely expect of that government, which is that sense of security, that sense of reliability, that those, whether it's healthcare, I'm going to have primary care, I'm going to have emergency healthcare, whether it's infrastructure, affordable housing, thriving public education, mental health services, social services that don't let people fall through the cracks. Greens focus on how do we get these outcomes? What do we need to measure to get there? And how do we do it efficiently and effectively? And we are the antidote to this back and forth that BC has been cursed with forever.
How will you contend with that age-old problem for parties coming into the campaign and say third place, that you know, a vote for the Greens may elect a Conservative in a riding? Certainly the NDP may deploy that argument against you or your candidates. What's your antidote for that?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things. One, only 3 people have ever been elected as Greens, so it's a steep climb to get elected as a Green. But the way that we have succeeded is to demonstrate to people that you're actually voting for something. BC, often elections come down to, I'm voting against this party or I'm voting against that party. When people have something to vote for, what we've seen historically is the highest voter turnouts in ridings that elect Greens. And from my experience a couple of weeks ago, going back and launching Cami Lockwood's campaign in Cowichan, we had over 100 people show up. We had a fantastic fundraising event for Cami, raised twice as much money as we thought we would. And I was really moved by this crowd of over 100 people standing up and giving me a standing ovation because they felt served. I think it's very tiresome to say that a riding is NDP or Conservative or Liberal or whatever, you know, iteration of this. Ridings belong to the people. And what is happening in election is you are electing the person that you want to represent you in the legislature. And that's why, at a local level, my pitch is I can promise a couple things. I am hardworking, I am responsive, and I am really committed to getting outcomes for my riding. And I can prove that by what we have seen in Cowichan for the last 7 years, historic investments, and the amount of attention that Cowichan has received from the provincial and federal governments in the last 7 years demonstrates the value of having a Green MLA.
Well, your 3 Green MLAs that have been elected since 2013 have represented constituencies on Vancouver Island or Gulf Islands. You almost elected an MLA in West Vancouver Sea to Sky last election. I think it was 60 votes, maybe.
Yeah.
What are you thinking this time in terms of the geography of your opportunity
Mhm.
and the type of voter that you think you can appeal? Where do you think they're coming from?
Mhm. Yeah, one funny story about Jeremy Valeriat, who it was 60 votes in the mail-in ballots that changed that. On election night, he won. And then it was the mail-in ballots that changed that outcome by 60 votes. There are people in West Vancouver Sky who still think that Jeremy is the MLA and have approached him for help and service. And so we're going to really aim to get that riding over the line. That's a riding that we are really feeling strong and confident. Jeremy's been working hard, has a great team. In other ridings and the other people that we're attracting, Arzina Hamir up in Courtney Comox has been running an incredibly strong campaign, has somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 active volunteers on her campaign, is talking to thousands and thousands of people. And I think what we are able to demonstrate is how hard we will work to get elected, which means that we will work hard after we're elected. And I think it's people who are dissatisfied with the NDP, but also people who recognize that simple answers, slogans are not going to get us out of the crises that we're in. So saying we're going to be tough on crime, or climate change isn't a serious crisis and we don't have to pay attention to it. This is what we're hearing from the BC Conservatives. I think a lot of people are recognizing that signals that this is a party and a leader who aren't going to take these issues seriously and get to the root causes and really be there to prevent and avoid the crises that we are just trapped in and that cost us so much money.
What happens if we end up in a bit of a nail-biter election and you find yourself similar to 2017 in a position of balance of power? Would you approach it differently or the same way as the last time? Have you thought about that at all?
Believe me, Mike, I've thought about it a lot. I'm not just the only leader that is, coming into this election for the second time. I'm the only leader that was in any way involved in those negotiations in 2017 that led to the confidence and supply agreement. And I'm a teacher and I'm a thinker, and I've reflected a lot on that process. And I think the orientation that I have now is, how do we ensure that the conversations that happen, if we're back in a minority and in a, as Adam always called it, a balance of responsibility position, how do we put people at the very center of those conversations? And I think in a lot of ways in 2017, it had been over 50 years since there had been a minority government in BC. There wasn't anybody that had experience, real lived experience involved in that. And I think a lot of it came down to parties, like whose agenda, whose ideas, whose vision are we talking about? And I think right now what we need to do as politicians, all of us, is ask ourselves, how do we ensure that we're serving the people of BC? And from my point of view, and I think, the difference between a minority NDP government and a majority NDP government is stark. It's been stark. Once they had their majority, the NDP became incredibly secretive, made changes to the freedom of information legislation, put a price on accessing information, have been called the most secretive government in Canada, kind of unwillingness to be held accountable for both their promises and what they're delivering and not delivering. I think we have to put that kind of democratic principles of transparency, accountability to people and to the public, but also how do we get the public more engaged in the work of governing in between elections. And I think a lot of people feel kind of disillusioned and dejected by the state of politics in a lot of ways. And as an example, if you look at the report that came out on the parliamentary culture that Eleanor Sturko, Mabel Elmore, and I were part of that working group. And looking at having regional caucuses, so having MLAs work together across party lines to better represent their regions of BC. Looking at having public members of parliamentary committees. We see examples of this in places like West Belgium, where they have a permanent citizens' assembly as part of their legislature. And that has resulted in less partisanship and more cooperation across party lines. I have been saying this for years, Mike, and I believe it with every fiber of my body. We are in really serious times, and the crises that we face right now are not the challenges of the 20th century when we had a lot of certainty and predictability. We have an uncertain and unpredictable climate. We have social issues. We have deepening inequality, which we know undermines social stability. We have so much deep poverty in our communities and concentration of wealth into fewer and fewer hands, both in Canada and around the world. We need to approach these serious times and these serious crises with a much more responsible way of looking at governing and governance. And to do that, I think having the public as a more active, participating more actively ensures that we are reminded who we serve when we're elected. We don't serve our parties. We serve the public, and that has to be at the center of everything. So if we're back in a minority, I'm very focused on how do we make government more responsive, more accountable, more transparent, and a better servant to the people of BC.
Well, you mentioned that the NDP majority behaved much differently than the NDP minority. But looking to the other side of the aisle, do you feel that you could work with the Conservatives if they had the upper hand in a minority situation? Do you see the basis for cooperation? Or is it like, I'll cross that bridge when I get there?
Yeah, I think I have learned that you can't just categorize people as this or that, as right and wrong, good and bad, all this kind of stuff. This is the tiresome thing about BC politics. My challenge with the Conservative caucus in the last legislative session was that they showed up to question period. They often did something, inflammatory that they would put out on social media, kind of rage farming or get people angry or upset. And then they left the building. John Rustad participated in one bill debate. And I think between Bateman and Rustad, they participated in 2 estimates debates. So you compare that to Adam and I, another 2-person caucus, between us, 17 estimates debates, 16 bill debates, and we introduced 11 private members' bills. We worked in the legislature on behalf of our constituents and on behalf of the province. And so for me, what I am keen on is being at a table with people who are taking the job seriously and who take the responsibility of governing and representation really seriously, and who move past the political grandstanding and focus on how are we going to solve these very serious problems that people are faced with in BC right now.
Well, you're wearing 2 hats as a parliamentary leader for your party in the House, and you've just talked about how you put a priority on that. But you're also the party leader, and you've had to, lead the flock across the province, and with 93 ridings now. How have you felt how that tension that exists between those 2 roles, because you can only be in one place at one time? And I've noticed that the Greens, you don't have as many candidates nominated at this point. have you felt like you've been playing catch up on this, or is this part of the kind of the overall plan?
Yeah, you know, we're small, and when you have MLAs like Adam and me who are going to insist on doing our job in the legislature and insist on doing our jobs in the constituencies, it means that we're divided. And I've always, for the last 4 years, I've described my life as having 3 full-time jobs. My MLA job in my constituency, the job in the legislature, and then the job as party leader. And those jobs really have 3 entirely different teams attached to them. My constituency team, our caucus team, and then the party team. And it's in the last few months since the end of the legislative session that I've really shifted a lot of my time and energy over to the party team. And I'm really so excited about the team that we've built here and the capacity that we have here. And yeah, we got a slower start to this campaign than I would have liked. I would have liked us to be further ahead than we are right now. But we have 75% of ridings. We either have candidates in place or we are moving candidates through the nomination process. So
75%.
75%. So we're down to the
Okay.
last couple dozen. I think it's 22 ridings that we are still working on prospects in.
I'm trying to do my math here.
Yeah.
Were you a math teacher as well? Because you could help me out
so
here.
71 out of 93 is
So
where,
you're expecting to have at least 70 candidates on the ballot?
yeah,
Okay.
at the very least.
I feel like that's breaking news here.
Yeah, we've always aimed to have candidates in every riding because we always get messages from people. I'm so upset I couldn't vote Green.
Right.
And we, the extraordinary field team here at the BC Green Party, literally it is 4 people, have just been working day and night to get candidates through the process and get us to the place where we are as close as we can be to a full slate. And I'm excited that we will be able to announce these candidates in the weeks to come in big batches. And
any big surprises of notables?
There's one. I'm not going to spill the beans just yet.
Okay,
There's
good.
one that I'm very excited about. But notable candidates already are the deputy leader, Dr. Lisa Gunderson, running in Oak Bay Gordon Head, a riding that has elected a Green twice, and so that's an exciting one for us. Camille Curry, who ran the BC Healthcare Matters Everyone Deserves a Family Doctor campaign. And of course, Jeremy Valeriot, Amir Nicole Charwood out in Kootenays. She's been working for over a year on her campaign. And we don't get elected by accident ever. There are people in the legislature who got elected by accident, who had no expectation they would be there and found themselves in the legislature. That doesn't happen for Greens, and it takes a lot of hard work. But
Richard Zisman's publishing his most interesting ridings list. I don't know where he's at right now. He started with number 93 and's worked his way down.
Okay.
I got to think your riding and the West Vancouver Sea to Sky should be top 10. West Vancouver Sea to Sky, because I think potentially an interesting 4-way race there. NDP candidate strong. Conservatives have a notable candidate. BC United hold the seat and they haven't nominated anybody yet. But you're riding, of course, taking on an NDP cabinet minister. I noticed that the Conservative candidate's been banging away on social media and other places too as well, mounting more of an aggressive campaign than the BC Liberals would have in recent times. So both of those, I think there's a lot of moving parts going on.
Yeah, I can promise one thing. We don't make politics more dull. We, insert Greens, it gets more interesting, right? And it comes back to that 2-party system. 2-party systems aren't very interesting. But we have, for the first time, really 4 parties that are actively engaged in this election. And I think that's good. That's good for democracy. It's good for voters to have that choice. Here in Victoria Beacon Hill, we do what we have to do. I have I think at last count, 140 volunteers that are engaged. We've knocked on almost every door once. We're getting around to the second round of canvassing here. I spend my afternoons knocking on doors and talking to people. Our campaign office on 4th Street is just a hive of joy and activity. And I have always approached campaigns as community building exercises. We are doing the work that needs to be done all the time, which is connecting people in communities, making communities stronger. And for me, if there's joy, then I know we're on the right track. And there's a lot of joy right now. We are having a lot of fun.
So who's taken on the role of campaign manager for the provincial campaign? Who's in your back room there?
Yeah, so there's a few people. Teamwork, Greens is key for us. So Adam Olson is the campaign chair.
Okay.
And he's really overseeing a lot of the communication side of the campaign. Adam is a gifted communicator, as people have seen for the last 7 years, and has, of course, a depth of understanding and expertise in all things. And so that is invaluable to have Adam in that role. And then on our field side, we have Maureen Balsillie from Ontario. She just successfully ran Aislinn Clancy's by-election, and Aislinn won as a Green in Ontario in the by-election. Not a single poll had Aislinn in a winning position, and she got more votes than all of the other candidates combined, which is a fancy way of saying she got more than half the votes. But it sounds better to say it the first way. And again, it's not a super secret formula for how Greens get elected. It really is talking to thousands and thousands of people and giving them the opportunity to vote for something that inspires them. I think politics should be inspiring. I think it should be hopeful. I think it should be fun. We're seeing that arrive in the US presidential campaign right now, and the relief that people, I think, are feeling that we don't have to have politics that is about being the nastiest person on the screen. We can have politics that talks about the future that we want to build and shape together. And for me, that's always been what's motivated me. I can see, I look back to the Shawnigan days and the landfill, the fight to get that permit revoked. And it was oriented to the future that we wanted for Shawnigan Lake. It was a future where we knew we had clean water. It was a future where we knew that our kids could have a beautiful lake to swim in. And that's how I've approached politics ever since. I can see a BC where we have community health centers in every community, and you don't have to worry about, do I get to see a family doctor or a primary caregiver? I'm attached to my community health center, and I know that whatever my health needs are today, I'm in the right place. I can see a future where we aren't subsidizing a dying fossil fuel industry. We are investing in a clean energy economy that builds long-term jobs in communities around the province. That means that we extricate ourselves from a boom and bust economy, which is harmful in the boom and it's harmful in the bust. And we move to an economy that actually ensures that we get to that place of security, predictability, certainty that I was talking about at the beginning. I can see a future. I can see an education system where kids are talking about the safety and security they feel at school, that they feel that they are valued. When we send kids to schools right now that are run down, that don't have enough EAs or teachers, that don't have school counselors or psychologists, we are sending the message to kids right now that, you you just don't really matter that much to us. Like, you don't matter enough for us to make the investment so that you spend your days in a beautiful, thriving environment. And I think that that is one of the greatest failures of a society that has an $89 billion budget. We're almost on par with per capita with Denmark as a province. And that Denmark, that's their military and foreign aid spending in there too. And we aren't delivering like spectacular public transit and incredible public education and a public healthcare system that is meeting the needs. All of that is possible, Mike. And you know, I often say, toss the table. I'm so frustrated and angry and disappointed that we have successive governments that say, oh, we're going to do all these things.
So you think the money's there, it's just not being spent properly?
The money is there. The money
What's the
there.
problem then? What's your analysis of where the NDP are blowing it?
I think it's where you spend the money. So choosing to prop up the fossil fuel industry, I think, is a terrible mistake to make in the 2020s. The International Energy Agency is itself saying, do not invest in more fossil fuel infrastructure. You are going to have stranded assets. So to pour billions of dollars of subsidies to prop up an LNG industry that really is a dead end road, I think, is terrible. We should be investing in building a clean energy infrastructure across the province. I think education is an investment that we should take seriously. And when we have not only a kind of scarcity public education system, but also it's harder and harder for young people to afford to go to university, that's a problem. We are failing to invest in the people that actually pull our economy up, that actually contribute to a healthier economy. I think that ignoring the impacts of climate change and waiting for the disasters to strike is economically and fiscally irresponsible. We've spent $1.1 billion already this year responding largely to the wildfires. The government budgeted $400 million. We told them, you're doing this wrong. You're not budgeting enough. They've done this year over year. I think the NDP have also they've chosen not to learn from the last 6 years, and they keep repeating the same mistakes. We've been saying for years they've gotten addicted to an overheated housing market that is eventually going to harm people who live here, and we're seeing those harms right now. That they're reliant on revenues from resources, but I mean, I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear, if you look at the 2023-24 budget, revenues from oil and gas, mining, and forestry combined account for 3.86% of provincial revenues. I think that we have an unfair tax system. We're overly taxing small businesses and middle and lower income people, and we are failing to tax the enormous wealth and high income people in a fair way. Like, I think there's so many adjustments that could be made. And the NDP got into power after 16 years and chose to carry on in a lot of ways with the same directions as the BC Liberals, and really failed to take the more courageous approach that they could have taken. I think we saw that with Barrett. We saw it a little bit with Harcourt, and to fundamentally say government has this responsibility to deliver these basic services, and that's what we're going to do. And instead they tinkered, and people are really frustrated after 7 years and an almost doubling of the budget that the tinkering hasn't resulted in improvements. In fact, a lot of people feel like things are worse.
Well, we touched on earlier that when we get down to the election campaign, you'll be withstanding attacks from other parties. The NDP will, and maybe the Conservatives and United too, will be saying, don't split the vote, a vote for Greens, a waste of vote. But you also have kind of potential situation where your former leader it appears to be poised to, or maybe already has endorsed the Conservatives, Andrew Weaver. Is that something you're particularly concerned about in Victoria with Dr. Weaver banging around, making his pronouncements?
Yeah, I can tell you, Mike, I think of him never. The only time I think of him is when I'm asked in an interview about him, and I say the same thing every time. Here's a guy that says he was a federal Liberal, then he was a provincial Green, then he was a provincial NDP, and now he's a provincial Conservative. I think that people can determine for themselves who this person appears to be, but I really do not spend any time or energy thinking about him. He seems to think about me a lot, which is weird. But I actually just find it kind of amusing and silly at this point.
It doesn't sound like you're going to be playing darts at the Red Lion with him anytime soon.
I don't think
And it's
so.
not in Beacon Hill anyway, so why would you? It's 10 o'clock on Saturday, October 19th.
Yeah.
What does success look like for you?
A larger Green caucus returning to the legislature. And, if we go back to the BC legislature with 4 or 6 MLAs, I think we could make just an enormous difference in this province. I think we are so overdue for an approach to politics that moves us out of this binary silliness that we're trapped in. And I've demonstrated, I think in the last 10 years as an elected official, I work across jurisdictions, I work across party lines, I deliver. We've had historic investments in Cowichan, new hospital, new high school, new hospice, the funding for the WEIR, youth emergency services, services for people with mental health and addictions, a successful model of housing people who are homeless. I want to keep doing this work on behalf of my constituents and the people of BC. And if I have 3, 4, 5 colleagues alongside of me, we can really change things in this province for the better.
Sonia Furstenau, thank you for making your first stop at the Hotel Pacifico. I hope it won't be your last. Good luck in the weeks ahead. Hats off to you and everyone who runs for office. I'm a chicken. I've never done it. I admire all of you who do it. So thank you very much for coming by and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thanks, Mike. It's a nice hotel. I like it.
Guess I've got another update on how hometown team TELUS is bringing better connectivity to BC. Because TELUS and Doig River First Nation, in partnership with All Nations Trust Company, the Government of Canada, the Government of BC, and the Northern Development Initiative Trust, have announced a $19.2 million initiative that will bring pure fiber to more than 60 households and a dozen businesses in Doig River First Nation, approximately 70 kilometers northeast of Fort St. John. The new fiber optic infrastructure will also serve as the backbone for TELUS's wireless network, laying the groundwork for 5G technologies in the years to come, and ensuring that people living in Doig First Nation have the tools they need to fully participate in the digital economy. A 100% fiber-to-the-home network means that every part of the TELUS Pure Fiber network is built with state-of-the-art fiber optics right up to the connection point at the home or business, ensuring customers have the fastest network available. This work is TELUS delivering on a commitment made in 2021 when they became the first technology company in Canada to launch a public Indigenous reconciliation action plan. That plan sets strategic targets in 4 key areas: connectivity, enabling social outcomes, cultural responsiveness and relationships, and economic reconciliation. Through public-private partnerships, 606 Indigenous lands have been connected to TELUS's broadband network, and 248 Indigenous lands connected to TELUS's Pure Fiber network, positively impacting rural and Indigenous households and businesses, which is as good a reason as any to root for the hometown team.
Hello, you've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
I thought Bruce Young was going to trash the place last week, but it's in amazingly good shape. I think Bruce has been domesticated, and we've had a great response to Bruce coming on. So thanks to Bruce for sharing his wisdom. We have a double shot of stranger danger here in the strategy suite today. Well, Andrea Reimer is not really a stranger. She's graced our presence once before. She's served as a Vancouver City Councillor and recently narrowly averted being vacuumed back into provincial politics. But Jordan Bateman does represent danger.
Yeah.
At least if you're proposing a sales tax hike. He defeated the transit referendum in 2015 wearing his bathrobe and slippers while conducting media interviews from his Langley basement, which whether or not he's in his basement right now, I prefer to believe he is. Former director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. He is also a former Langley Township councillor. Hi, Jordan. Hi, Andrea. How's your summer been?
It's been great. It's been fantastic. Lots of time with the kids, and my children now are, one of them is UBC School of Med doing midwifery. So, and one just graduated high school, and then the third is still, running around Langley causing trouble. So lots of good time with them, and it's been a very restful summer for sure, getting ready for the big election push this fall.
How about you, Andrea?
Yeah, I've had a great summer. I spent most of July traveling to visit family, birth family, many of whom I've never met before. And COVID,
Wow.
I started connecting with my family, and then COVID hit and it all got kind of put on hold. So it's been a very, great. It's always great to travel in Canada in summer to sort of more remote places, but extra great to meet all these folks that have been waiting many years to get to know me. So that's been really nice.
Andrea, I'm not sure when you were on city council if you ever sat on the P&E board.
I did not, although I definitely was kept abreast of the ins and outs of the P&E and the challenges that it faced. I mean, when I was on council, we were kind of charged with coming up with a master plan for it because it was on a bit of life support at the time. Mike, you may remember from your time in government the racetrack challenges at that time, and just trying to keep this something that nobody had really taken ownership of in many years and try and get a thoughtful plan moving forward. So other than the rain, it's mostly stabilized.
Yeah, I made my annual trip there the other day. Saw the pig races. My pig, John Ham, was not successful, but there were many other pigs that were flying down the.
I'm realizing half the people listening to this podcast are too young to get the John Ham reference.
Probably, yeah. There were some other great names as well. It was one of those P&E days where my daughter and I, we weren't doing too many rides, but we were just soaking it in. We went to, I had some pierogies at Hunky Bill's, and went to the marketplace and got shaken down. The gullible person that I am was drawn in to buy some questionable purchases, one of which I will present to Kate next week on Hotel Pacifico.
Is it an owl? A minivan?
It is not an owl. It's not an owl, but it did make me think of Joy McPhail.
Can't wait to see that episode.
Quite a cliffhanger, yeah.
This would be a good personality test, though. You could ask people what they buy at the marketplace at the P&E.
Leave your guesses at Hotel Pacifico on Twitter. Leave your guesses.
So started off this week, Jordan, you once led the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, and not really sure what happened to it after you left. I don't hear about them as much anymore as I did during your heyday and Troy Lanigan and Mark Milkey's heyday. But there's a lot to work with these days on taxpayer issues. Last week, Von Palmer was fairly critical of Minister Conroy over her presentation of her quarterly report that showed that last year's deficit was higher than anticipated and that there's really no plan to balance budget. Did you follow the quarterlies, and what was your take on that?
Yeah, I did. It's troubling. Look, I know that we, coming out of COVID, everyone likes to say, hey, debt deficits, it doesn't matter anymore. Just keep borrowing and spending on what you need today or want today and kicking the can down the road. The problem is those bills come due. And a guy like Von Palmer, he's been around, right? He's seen 17 of these cycles. Sonia talked about boom and bust. Von's lived through 17 of these or so. So he knows that eventually those bills come due. it is shocking to me the rate that David Eby's run up debt. That does have an effect down the road as far as what you can do, as far as if you're dedicating so much more to interest, what you can do in other ways with the provincial budget. But the more shocking part was like, you shouldn't even give like lip service to a plan to return to balance. Like it was sort of a hand waving, that's the next finance minister's problem. I'm out of here, kids. Enjoy. I didn't understand that. Like, give some sort of semblance of a plan. I mean, right now their deficit goes from, I think it was $5 billion this year to 8 next, and it's growing. It stays high for a long time. You think they would have some sort of plan to return to balance, or at least gentle nod towards it, rather than the Trudeau, the budget will balance itself angle.
Andrew, do you think this is an issue that will be part of the election conversation at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will definitely come up. I do think there's sort of this weird dichotomy where there's a lot of nostalgia for the way things used to be, like pre-COVID, pre-hellscape summers of smoky, can't go camping, can't light a fire, can't breathe kind of summers, pre-inflation, pre-supply, like all of these things. And so I think people yearn to go back to a day when our biggest problem was arguing over balanced budgets. But I think we all also are very aware there's some very real challenges that didn't exist 10, 20, 30 years ago that we are going to have to reckon with. And in large part because we didn't take actions that we should have taken over the last 10, 20, 30 years. So, I mean, I'd hope that is the discussion we're going to have. I think it's going to be a grab bag of all of the above.
Well, you were on, both you were on city councils, but Andrea, first, you were on city council and you had to balance a budget every year. And obviously you had to face tough decisions every year, decisions that the ABC Council is finding very tough too. Has COVID changed the nature of tough decisions these days? That, are we thinking that tough decisions are just being deferred down the road, or is it just, has the finances of government just been fundamentally restructured? Like it is, as you just said, it is a lot different today post-COVID than it was pre-COVID in terms of how we address getting to balance, or at least trying to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough issue to equate. I think municipalities were largely rendered, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but to the backseat during the COVID emergency precisely because they can't raise revenue through anything other than one mechanism. They can't go into debt. And they're really, municipalities and local governments exist off a 19th century constitutional structure that is extremely inadequate to meet the problems of the 21st century. But then what happens is provinces and federal governments have to use their fiscal capacity and their legislative capacity to intervene. As we saw during COVID, some of those interventions might have made sense in Vancouver. They didn't at all make sense in Greenwood or Atlin or wherever. And so there's a larger discussion there about local government power, but I think municipalities have to balance books because they have very limited fiscal tools. One, actually, property tax. When I was on Vancouver City Council, we doubled the available taxes available to Vancouver by convincing provincial government that you were involved with, Mike, to give us the empty homes tax, right? So, right. I mean, that's how slim the fiscal capacity of municipal governments are. If we were trying to run a province off that kind of capacity, we'd be in a lot more trouble than we've been at any time in any of our lives.
Jordan, you want to jump in?
Yeah. Another former Vancouver City Councillor, Jeff Meggs, who obviously would usually be here, I do wonder what he and John Horgan think of the spending that's going on now and the debt that's being incurred, because they were so meticulous about trying to avoid that narrative from the 90s. And not surprisingly, Meggs, Horgan, Adrian Dix, they were there in the 90s when the NDP got this reputation as, wild spenders and running up debt. And, to Horgan's credit, those first 2 years, he tried to hold it in line. On the municipal side, as a councillor, I never went to Union of BC Municipalities. It never really grabbed me, and there were other councillors in Langley who wanted to go. I am curious about this year's UBCM. You have what's generally been a fairly warm welcome for NDP premiers and leaders in the past at UBCM, but now they're starting to flex their muscle and impose a lot of new rules, cost changes onto these municipalities. It's a great piece in the Vancouver Sun today on just how development cost charges are going to be really tightly focused by the province. They're not going to allow a lot of the creep that's gone on, which has been the other way that these municipalities, growing communities like Langley Township, for example, have been building infrastructure. So I'm very curious what kind of reception David Eby, Ravi Kahlon get at UBCM this year, especially if you have opposition parties coming in and saying, forget that, we recognize local government authority. We want to make sure that your voice is being heard and that you have the access to some financial tools you need.
Well, the UBCM convention will run right to the eve of the election starting. So it will be the 16th to the 20th of September. And then, as far as we know, the election starts on September 21st. And there's a little tweak in the schedule this year. The premier typically speaks on the Friday, and that's been moved back, I believe, to the Thursday. And then the opposition leaders are speaking on the Friday. So there's UBCM will be a stage in the final week of the pre-writ for all those parties getting their message out, and mayors and councillors and rural directors are also part of that stage, depending on what happens that week. I don't want to over dramatize it. I don't think necessarily UBCM doesn't tend to generate a ton of front page news in provincial politics, but maybe this year will be a little bit different. Who knows?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic, Jordan, to throw in there. Is that, I can't think of a single local government person I've talked to in the last 6 months who isn't pretty riled up about what they see as provincial overreach, and that extends right across the political spectrum. The non-aligned, everybody is quite agitated, and I think, even regardless of where you stand on the issue of density and housing, like, it's a lot about the way it's been done as opposed to what's been done. Although some folks are just upset. West Vancouver is a notable example of one that's just upset about the concept of new density. But yeah, I can't imagine a worse backdrop if I were them to be going into an election with, but I think unavoidable.
Well, one to watch for sure. So, both of you were lurking in the shadows of Hotel Pacifico while I was interviewing Sonia Furstenau today. Well, let's start with you, Andrea. You've got a background as a erstwhile Green from your earlier days. What was your take on what you were hearing from Sonia today in terms of her message and what she's strategically trying to do?
Yeah, it's always lovely to listen to her. She's very likable. She's very smart. But I in politics, as you both know, what matters isn't how smart you are, it's what you do with those smarts. And I was quite surprised by a few aspects of the interview. I think she does a solid job. She is, as I said, a pleasure to listen to. But it took her 30 minutes to mention the word climate. Not kidding. Like, I was waiting for it. And these are the bread and butter issues for her voters. And moving into an election, we're literally on the doorstep of it. Your job number one has to be to distinguish and contrast yourself. And she has a pretty clear runway right now to be talking about. The NDP have had trouble. They've tried to decouple climate action from fossil fuel expansion, and those are hard concepts to decouple. And Sonia, as you saw at the end of her interview, can speak well to it. Issues on democratic reform, action on toxic drug crisis. There was a lot she could have said that I think would help distinguish her. But I think the thing that stood out for me the most, Mike, I learned more about Sonia Furstenau in your intro than I have ever heard about her personally. And that's kind of amazing. Like, I have a Green pedigree. It was my first political home. I wrote their 2001 platform and their 2005. I was elected under the Greens the first time around. And so I pay some good attention to her, but I not only learned more from your intro, but she really tried to distance herself from what I thought was an incredibly important story about her connection to immigration, which is the story of this province, right? It's not the only story, but it's certainly a story that would resonate a lot more with voters than my mom is from Saturna Island, which you pointed out is not a story most of us share.
Well, it's my exhaustive research, obviously, my team of 200 people in the hotel basement, furiously reading her official biography to pull that out. But, but Jordan, I was surprised when she said they'll have over 70 candidates, because I think they're only about 25 to 30 right now, if that. So to me, that's new. To me, that's news, because I think the Greens not being on the ballot would be a major event in terms of, arguably, who does that help? Who does that hurt? It's assumed that it would hurt the NDP more if a Green's on the ballot. Not necessarily in all cases, but the fact that they seem to be ready to open the floodgates in September and throw Greens on the ballot everywhere was kind of surprised me.
Yeah, and I wonder what kind of a connection those people are going to have with the community. Like, everyone's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook pages are filled with various candidates from our little political stripes, knocking doors, going to every event, really kind of getting into there in the community. You need time to do that, right? Like a 4-week campaign, you're just basically sending a no-hoper in there and just fill this so we can get our per vote subsidy after the fact. I want to give you a stat from the Leisure poll. And this was really like, when I think about the Greens, this is what I think about. Like, how do they grow past the federal vote, like the federal Green vote? And the truth is they're not. So Leisure asked, what provincial party do you support? What federal party do you support? Only 3% of NDP voters federally support the Greens. 3%. Only 1% of CPC voters federally support the Greens. And only 6% of federal Liberals support the Greens. So you have, I think it was something like 88% of federal Green voters support the provincial Green. So you have this little faction that is, talking to themselves only, and you see it in question period, by the way, when, she gave, Rustad a hard time for not having the kind of question she would like. I watched every question period from the spring session. And you'd be like, okay, this is the issue of the day. BC Night's hammering on affordability or on public safety or whatever.
You watched every question period in the spring session? Get a life.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Look, I have a TV in the office. I have a TV in the office. Would you rather me be working?
You need help.
Come on. But it would always cut then to Adam Olsen or Sonia Furstenau. They would ask the most obscure, narrow question, even on as far as environmental questions go. Like, sure, ask environmental questions, but they were like, X tree in Y forest is in danger of being cut down today. And, don't you think, and it was like, what's that for? Like how are you going to grow? Like, what are you going to put on social media about that's going to draw more people to your coalition? So all that to say, this late start on candidates, sure, 70 candidates, they got to get there, but you're not giving yourself enough time to reach out past your little green base into these other federal parties and bring them in.
Well, Rustad clearly made a decision just to head to the countryside and forget about what was going on at the legislature.
Get this important work done. I mean, she made some excellent and I think quite principled points about the responsibilities in the legislature. But when you're party leader, you also have a responsibility to the goals and aspirations, policy aspirations, right? And those aren't going to be met by you arguing even non-obscure points in question period in an election year. I actually think that they may be further behind this year before the election than they were in 2020. And that was a snap election, which is saying a lot in terms of what's going to be possible for them to make the gains that she was talking about this election.
Well, last election, I recall that she kind of took off after the debate. I think she had a good debate because the contrast between her and Wilkinson and the premier, she looked different, right? She sounded different. She looked different. And I think part of the special sauce for the Greens over the years has been safe haven for protest voters. Certainly in 2017, a lot of BC Liberals just parked with the Greens in that campaign because they were, maybe 3% or 4% of the BC Liberal vote that had been there previous election just didn't want to go to the NDP, but kind of stopped halfway to the Greens. So does she have a protest vote upside this time, given that the Conservatives have disrupted the race? And so you got the center right, they have a choice between two parties right now. And EB's kind of swung, perception-wise, he swung to the Green side, to the left on the NDP coalition compared to Horgan. Where does that leave the Greens?
with zero seats.
Yeah, I was gonna say. That's
honestly, isn't that the smart bet? 0 seats.
Yeah, I do think they do have some dark horse chances. But yeah, I mean, I think she did a fantastic job of introducing herself to British Columbians in the 2020 debate. And that was a hard to knock on doors election, right? So the way most of us got to know that, well, maybe not us in this room, but people who aren't as watching every legislative question period in the spring session, they're going to get to know folks by watching the TV debate. The poll that stands out for me, Jordan, you were mentioning the Leger one. There was one by Angus Reid a while back that listed off the qualities of the leaders, like what was the top of mind qualities. And Sonia and David were indistinguishable. Like they had exactly, like they're both smart, they're both warm, they're both trustworthy. Like that was the list. And so unless she can find another way to distinguish her, I think that she's gonna fade into the background a bit in the debate. That's not to say that she can't pick up ground. I do think there is what I call the Kennedy Stewart offense, where you hope for a 4-way split somewhere and somehow you can, eke out the plurality and come up the middle. I think there's a potential in a couple of ridings, but they're long shots for sure. And I think notably not hers. Like I was hoping you'd ask her, Mike, what the strategy was behind running in Victoria Beacon Hill. I have not been able to find anyone who can tell me what's happening there.
Well, I would say in Beacon Hill, she's definitely taken on uphill battle. Carol James's former seat, Grace Lohr, seems to be well regarded. However, what's disruptive in Beacon Hill right now is the crime issue and the issues around homelessness and encampments, and creating a bit of disquiet in Victoria. And you saw that a bit in the last municipal election, and the Conservative is very active in that riding. And so I just, she needs a perfect storm. She needs to win with 35% of the vote. And I'll take her at face value for what she perceives as her ground strength there. So, she'll need momentum from the provincial campaign to get her over the hump in Beacon Hill for sure. But West Van Cedar Sky is pretty interesting one, given the split there. He should have won last time had there not been so many mail-in ballots last election because of the crazy COVID election. He likely would have won. So now the circumstances are different this time, so we'll see. I'd actually probably put my money on. I don't know who to put my money on, but I'm not sure I'd put my money on the Greens there.
I put it on the Conservative in that riding, just because you have, well, that's tough to say actually. The NDP candidate is very good. Jen Ford, I think, is former head of UBCM. A lot of UBCM shoutouts here. You have the Chancellor of CAPU and like the worldwide president of United Way running for the Conservatives, and then you don't have a United candidate yet. So the longer the United wait, the less strength they're going to have, the better for the Conservative.
Yeah, they might get lucky there. Well, let's go to the main event here. We'll let the Greens sail off on the conversation list here. BC United is going to, at least for the near term, keep attacking the Conservatives. And Jordan, are they a fly to be swatted away, or are they an angry swarm of mad hornets that are going to sting and hurt the Conservative chances of winning?
Well, I mean, so earlier this week, I announced that I was, as an old BC United organizer, I was now supporting the BC Conservatives. And it is based on vote splitting. And the irony is it's all the same arguments we on the BC Liberal side used in 2013 against the BC Conservatives. At one point, there was 22% BC Conservative, 22% BC Liberal in that campaign. And we all know what happened. Christy Clark was elected premier. The same arguments apply, but now flipped around. And, all of us here are BC history buffs. We know that the free enterprise vote reformats every generation. We seem to be in the midst of that reformatting right now. And the truth is, if you want to stop David Eby, if you want to stop the NDP policies, you got to rally around one party. That party is the BC Conservatives. They're within the margin of error in some polling, behind a little bit more in others, ahead in a couple. They're right in the thick of the fight, whereas BCU has fallen to under 10 points. BCU probably has to go to 5-ish points to really kind of stop that vote split from costing Rustad a chance at the Premier's office. It's tough sledding for BC United for sure.
I take it's a decision you didn't make lightly.
No, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And it's hard not because of when we think political parties, you think of the big personalities, the leader or the top MLA. It's not because of them that's tough. Like, it's because of the frontline people and the volunteers, like, pour their heart and soul into this party and are really believe in it and are carrying these, candidates who have, hardly any funding, and like they're working so darn hard. And, it's hard to step away from that. However, every party has those people, has those grassroots people. And I do think that, eventually, the free enterprise vote will come back together under a different banner. And we'll be able to heal those relationships. But, there's been hard conversations, online and on DM and even on the old school telephone with folks who are, upset. There's also been a ton of folks who have sent me notes saying, I'm with you. I made this decision X days ago. We've got to get John Rustad elected. So there are trade-offs for sure, but there are some hurt feelings, as you would expect on any team.
So you mentioned the Leger poll. There was a Leger poll released last week by the BC Chamber of Commerce, which had it at online survey, had it at 43, 35, 12 BCU, 10 Green. Young men definitely more likely favor Conservatives, and 35 to 54-year-old men as well. Older voters continue that trend of preferring the NDP, which is a turnout advantage. And then the regional breaks where the Metro Vancouver was fairly competitive, except the city of Vancouver was more NDP, the interior was more Conservative, Island NDP. I sound like a broken record here compared to previous weeks. So, Andrea, what do you think is job number one? Let's assume that the NDP have a bit of a lead going into the election, not a double-digit lead probably, but a marginal lead heading into the election. They have this base of support with older people that they have not really had in the past, historically. What do you think job number one is?
I mean, job number one in every election is go knock on doors, but in a super tight election, it's even more the thing you got to go do. At Jordan's points earlier about how well are you known in the community? How well are you taking the people who are well known in the community out on the doors with you and making sure that you're getting eyeball to eyeball contact with as many people as possible? I think the important thing in any poll is, to me, the number of undecided voters, and that's still quite high. It's over 20% are undecided. But of course, the important thing in the actual election is how many show up, because a lot of those undecideds are actually just saying, I'm not motivated enough to vote in this election. So I think that is the second job that is in front of the NDP right now. And it falls primarily on AB himself, is how are you going to motivate and energize people? And we were talking about Christy Clark in 2013, a really great example, right? Where the longer you're in government, the more things you've done that make someone angry or annoy someone, or over time, they get more and more motivated to vote against you. If they weren't that inclined in your direction in the first place. So that's going to drive Conservative and potentially United turnout. So the question for David is, how is he going to motivate and energize his base to show up? Because that's really going to be the difference in a lot of these ridings where a two-way race is going to make it a lot more competitive than it was in 2020.
Mm-hmm. Well, with regard to the NDP underlying numbers, the Premier continues to do well in terms of his impressions of his leadership. 52% of a favorable impression in this poll to plus 15, better than any other leader, although Sonia herself actually did well as a net favorable. The Rustad was net negative, Falcon very much net negative. But more worrying for me, if I were an NDPer, is the right track, wrong track. It's net negative. 48% think province is on the wrong track. Jordan, now that you're a freshly minted Conservative, what do you think job number one is for the Conservatives in the weeks ahead here?
Job number one is to flesh out a little bit of the policy side. Like, these folks have been going full tilt for quite some time on very little resources. And it wasn't until the last quarter that the fundraising really flipped. They don't get the same kind of tax subsidy that the other parties get because of previous election performance. But now you're starting to see, well, you've seen basically the emptying out of BC United headquarters. They're down to 4 or 5 folks, is my understanding. All those folks have moved over to the BC Conservatives and brought that expertise with them. You're seeing, like Kevin Falcon's leadership team, core leadership team. I don't think there's a single person. Once Mark Robertson left BC United and went to the BC Conservatives, I don't think there's a single person left at BC United who was part of that core team.
You yourself were a Kevin Falcon supporter.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I was twice. And 2011 when Mike handed our hats to us. But, it's like it's falling apart organizationally there. Money is tight because they're not bringing in the donations. My understanding is they can't borrow beyond, what the guaranteed taxpayer subsidy is. So they don't really have the finances anymore, BC United. And, the BC Conservatives are the only party that's really seeing a growth in support. The Greens are stagnant, BCU is going down, and the NDP are creeping down slightly. So there is this huge opportunity. So, the debate, I actually think it's good for Rustad to have Sonia Furstenau on the debate. She's such a lovely, calming presence. Like even on this, even on the call here, I was like, I just felt very calm and safe with Sonia there, talking to me through the screen. I think that may ratchet down any kind of emotion between Falcon and Rustad, because clearly there is there's a history there. Rustad just has to, get some policy out, refresh the team, make sure that, they're bringing in more help on the organizational side. And
doesn't have a lot of time.
Momentum. No, he doesn't have a lot of time. That's true.
And when I look at the 3 top issues that people are concerned about, healthcare, cost of living, housing, who best to handle those issues? It's EB.
Yeah.
It's either they haven't prosecuted the case against EB well enough, or voters are finding the alternative less appealing than the incumbent.
Yeah, I think there's a frustration building out there about some of these issues. I don't think folks have connected it yet to EB's door. Like, healthcare is, healthcare overdose, all these different things. They're all provincial responsibilities. Well, who's in charge of the provincial government? Maybe we should hold that guy to account. The problem for Rustad is that, and this is the frustration in the free enterprise community and in the business with the business folks that I've talked to, is like, why is BC United shooting at John Rustad and the Conservatives when you've got this incredible target of the NDP right there? Like, focus your criticism on them. And, there was a shift when Kevin Falcon brought in this new campaign manager to basically, blast away at the BC Conservatives and try to grow your vote by absolutely devouring theirs. It hasn't worked. But what it has done is it's helped EB skate on some of these issues, and it's forced BC Conservatives to put in resources on defense rather than, letting them go on offense against the NDP record.
Andrea, how important do you think an active, vigorous BC United campaign is to the NDP's re-election?
I think a lot of their strategy, like a year ago, was heavily depending on 2 active United Conservative campaigns kind of canceling themselves out. And I think they've got ground to make up now as a result of that, right? You get a bit complacent, I think, over time. I always said in politics, you're only ever as good as your opposition is. And I think they've suffered a bit from
Are you surprised at, I think we're all surprised, but are you surprised at just how quickly the right has completely turned upside down in the last year?
No, I think it is surprising, but also I'm not surprised. I think if you're watching sort of global trends, this is a very common pattern around the world. And I think also going back to like where we all started today with the Greens, I've had a front row seat to the Greens as I was watching, basically the German Greens drive Green vote here and Green vote in BC, driving federal vote, and nobody really knew what the Greens were all about. We could have put almost anything in a platform and people still would have voted Green because they had a general sense it was a good idea. I think that's what's happening with the Conservatives. People, we hear polling and anecdotal stories all the time that people can't pick Rustad out of a police lineup, but they sure know who Pierre Poilievre is, and that's what they're kind of interested in voting for. So I think what will become much more interesting for our political watchers is what happens as people get to know who the Conservatives are and who the leadership of the party is. I think both the Conservatives and it sounds like the Greens are going to have challenges around quick candidate growth. I mean, the Conservatives have already seen that challenge of who are these people and what do they stand for. I think any party that picks up candidates quickly and grows fast, that can be something that they're dealing with.
That's what they said in 91 about the BC Liberals. Like, who are these people? That's what they said about 2001. Half the BC Liberal caucus was unknown, right? Like, you grow into the role. As we saw with John Horgan as the premier, you grow into the role. And so I'm not too concerned about that. Here's the last crazy stat from that leisure poll I just want to throw out for you guys. The BC NDP are supported by 13% of Polyev voters and 63% of federal Liberals. BC United is supported by 8% of Polyev voters, so 5 points behind what EB gets from CBC voters and 22% of federal Liberal voters. So, like, talk about a party without a camp right now. That's BC United.
Well, and I was going to ask both of you, because I feel like you're in a better place to answer this than I am. Where are the federal Liberal voters going to go? Like, I can't see them supporting a Polyev surge, what they would perceive as a Polyev surge in BC. So what's their plan?
Well, I think what Jordan's saying there is that a majority are voting NDP at this point.
Yeah, 2/3.
Now, the federal Liberal vote has shrunk a bit, right, compared to last election. So some of those people who used to vote federal Liberal have already gone probably to the Conservatives. And those are probably the marketplace for BC Conservatives, because those kind of center-right voters that may have been federal Liberal voters in the past. But as Bruce Young said last week on the Strategy Suite, there's another coalition that may be forming, and that is a federal Liberal provincial NDP coalition that is every bit as robust as what a center-right coalition could be. And that's, I think that's what's at stake in this election is who's going to have the strongest appeal to those voters that are loose fish right now.
Yeah, but it does. If the NDP did move towards the federal Liberals policy-wise, I mean, you should be able to see some open room there for the Greens on that
Potentially.
flank. I know that was one of Vision's problems, is that we were straddling a lot of political real estate. And, the further you move towards centrist positions, the more you're letting go of some of the what would be considered more left-wing positions. That's hard territory to hold on to.
Well, on that note, let's go grab a drink in the minibar.
Awesome.
Do you know why they call it natural gas? In 1862, 4 years after the formation of the colony, the first gas-powered streetlight was lit in front of J.D. Carroll's liquor store in downtown Victoria. The Victoria Gas Company's new plant in Rock Bay was the source of supply. Back in the day on Vancouver Island, gas used to be produced from coal deposits on the island. The gas was known as coal gas or town gas as it was manufactured in town. Since then, a lot has changed. With the exploration of the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, British Columbia found gas that was naturally produced through geologic processes. This natural gas was more affordable than the manufactured gas and has come to dominate BC's gas system over the past century. Today, FortisBC's gas system connects over 1 million homes and businesses. And like the shift from manufactured gas to natural gas, our province's energy system continues to evolve. FortisBC is bringing us back full circle by looking at new ways to move our energy system forward. That means working with farmers, local governments, industry, and Indigenous partners to develop renewable and low-carbon gas projects right here in BC and elsewhere. FortisBC, energy for a better future and a better podcast.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
Jordan, would you like to start off this week with
a
shot or raise a glass? Or
I would like to raise a glass if I could. I'm feeling very positive these days after listening and being part of this conversation. But my late father-in-law, before he passed away a few years ago, he was 25 years clean and sober. And this was a big deal. That was a life-changing thing for our family. So I have this real soft spot, despite my fiscal conservative, anti-tax ways, branding that the folks like to put on me. I have a real soft spot when it comes to addiction services, mental health, how those all kind of correlate. So I want to raise a toast to my friend Katie Merrifield, renowned BC, former BC Liberal organizer, Conservative Party of Canada organizer, one of the smartest campaign people I know. She just basically stepped away from her political career, political campaigning organizing career, to take on a role as Director of Communications for the Canadian Centre of Recovery Excellence. And the idea behind this organization is they'll kind of be like a house for studying the statistics of what's working in what provinces as far as addiction treatment is going, what isn't working. Sort of like the Canadian Institute of Health Information is globally for the healthcare system. So, it takes a lot to step away from, your career that you're well known for, that you had, lots of opportunity in, but raise a toast to Katie Merrifield for moving on to CORE and for taking up the cause for folks who are addicted and need help. And need to have and the policymakers need to have the best understanding possible of what's going to work.
All right. Andrea.
I love that. And I didn't know she'd moved on there. That's great news for the policy area. And it's really cool to hear, Jordan. You're making me feel like I didn't put nearly as much thought or emotional care into mine. But, honestly, it's a bit of the doldrums of politics, despite the election right now. In the late stages of August here, but I don't think I have ever been as excited about rain in August as I have this last week. And so just to raise a cheers to whatever factors came together I can't remember the last time we were able to have a campfire on a long weekend when we were camping in the South Coast here. So pretty excited about that, but I think even more so just really grateful to all those communities that have been fighting so hard to try and protect things. The idea that they just get a little bit of a break for a few weeks, and just to thank all the people who've been on the front lines of fighting all those fires over the last number of, weeks, but it feels like it's going on a decade now that we've been dealing with this.
All right.
That's great.
I'll keep it light and breezy here. I'm going to raise a glass to Sonia Furstenau for coming on today. I respect the time that any leader would give to share with podcasts like ours. And I'm hopeful that we'll hear from the other leaders in the coming weeks. Kevin Falcon has confirmed already, and he'll be on in coming weeks, and look forward to hearing from the other two in short order. Or else I will take shots. I will take shots. But I won't yet. But that wraps up a great episode today. I'd like to thank our guest, BC Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau, for taking the time to stop by Hotel Pacifico, our first leader in this election cycle. I'd also like to thank Andrea Reimer and Jordan Bateman for coming by the Strategy Suite this week and lending their expertise. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, TELUS, for their ongoing support, and thank you, Fortis BC. See you next week. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.